1 week and 6 days. That's all the time I have left before my transformation becomes irreversible. 1 week and 6 days before I become like Edmund Hartwell, a hybrid entity serving the archive's collective consciousness. Dr. Chun is working on a procedure to stop the process, but she's warned me that it may require sacrifices I'm not prepared to make. My name is Mr. Keeper, and today I'm going to show you something that challenges everything I thought I knew about good and evil, sacred and profane, protection and corruption. Since discovering the truth about my scheduled transformation, I've been questioning everything. If the network has been manipulating reality for 70 years, if they've been controlling governments and populations, if they've been preparing humanity for the convergence, what does that say about the nature of good and evil itself? The objects I'm about to show you were once instruments of faith, hope, and spiritual protection. They were created to bring people closer to the divine, to offer comfort in times of suffering, to provide guidance in moments of moral uncertainty. But something went wrong. Something corrupted them, turned them into instruments of the very evil they were meant to oppose. These aren't just paranormal artifacts, they're theological impossibilities. Objects that suggest the boundaries between sacred and profane aren't as clear as we've been taught. Objects that imply the divine and the diabolic might be two sides of the same coin. And after everything I've learned about the network, after discovering that my own government has been serving supernatural entities for decades, I'm beginning to wonder, what if good and evil aren't opposing forces? What if they're just different aspects of the same cosmic plan? What if the network isn't the enemy of humanity, but its necessary evolution? What if the convergence isn't a conquest, but a salvation? What if everything I've been fighting against is actually what I should be fighting for? These questions haunt me as I prepare for the choice I'll have to make in less than 2 weeks. But first, let me show you objects that will make you question everything you believe about the nature of divine protection. Object 0891, the Inverted Bible. This leather-bound copy of the King James Bible belonged to the monastery of San Michele in Tuscany from 1523 to 1944. But this Bible doesn't preach salvation. It preaches damnation, and the words on its pages change depending on who's reading them. The Bible was discovered by Brother Francesco Benedetti in the monastery's archives in 1944 during the chaos of World War II. The monastery had been serving as a refuge for displaced families, and Brother Francesco was cataloging religious texts to provide comfort to the refugees. At first glance, the Bible appeared normal. Leather binding, illuminated pages, Latin text in careful calligraphy. But when Brother Francesco began reading aloud from the Psalms during evening prayers, something impossible happened. The words coming from his mouth weren't the words written on the page. Instead of "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," Brother Francesco found himself reciting, "The darkness is my master, I shall not resist." Instead of "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," he spoke. "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of righteous light, I will embrace all evil." Brother Francesco tried to stop, tried to read different passages, but every verse he attempted came out inverted, corrupted, transformed into its opposite meaning. The Bible was forcing him to preach the antithesis of everything he believed. Word of the incident spread through the monastery. and other brothers attempted to read from the Bible. The results were always the same. No matter what passage they chose, no matter how carefully they read, the words that came from their mouths were blasphemous inversions of the original text. But the corruption wasn't limited to spoken words. When the brothers examined the Bible more carefully, they discovered that the text itself was changing. Passages that had been comforting became threatening. Verses about love became verses about hatred. Stories of redemption became stories of eternal damnation. Father Benedetti, the monastery's abbot, documented these changes in a journal that we acquired along with the Bible. His entries reveal a man struggling to understand how an instrument of faith could become an instrument of corruption. Day 12, he writes in October 1944, "The Bible continues to transform itself. Today I found that the Lord's Prayer has been replaced with what can only be described as a prayer to darkness. Our Father who art in shadow, hallowed be thy darkness. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in hell." The transformed Bible began affecting the monastery itself. Brothers who spent time reading from it found their faith wavering, their prayers becoming confused, their understanding of right and wrong becoming clouded. The refugees, seeking comfort in familiar passages, were instead confronted with texts that filled them with despair and hopelessness. Father Benedetti made the difficult decision to lock the Bible away, but the damage was already done. Several brothers had begun experiencing what they described as spiritual inversions, moments when their natural impulses toward good were replaced by urges toward evil. Day 37, Father Benedetti writes, "Brother Marco attempted to bless a dying child today, but the words that came from his mouth were a curse. Brother Giuseppe tried to comfort a grieving widow, but found himself speaking of eternal separation rather than divine reunion. The Bible has infected us all with its corruption." The monastery contacted Vatican authorities, who sent a team of investigators to examine the Bible. Their report, classified until 1994, concluded that the object represented a theological impossibility that challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of divine protection. The Bible was removed from the monastery in 1945 and has been in government custody ever since. But its effects on religious personnel have been documented in dozens of classified reports over the past 80 years. Dr. Chin's research on the inverted Bible revealed something that the Vatican investigators had missed. The Bible wasn't randomly corrupting religious texts. It was systematically inverting them according to a specific pattern. Every change, every transformation, every corruption served to create a coherent theology that was the exact opposite of Christianity. It's not just changing words, Dr. Chin explained during our meeting in Sub 7. It's creating an alternative religious system, a complete inversion of Christian doctrine that's internally consistent and theologically sophisticated. Someone or something with a deep understanding of religious philosophy is using this Bible to construct a counterfaith. But the most disturbing discovery came when I attempted to read from the Bible myself. The text that appeared on the pages wasn't random corruption. It was specifically tailored to my situation, my beliefs, my current crisis of faith. "Blessed are those who serve the darkness," I found myself reading, "for they shall inherit the new earth. Blessed are those who abandon their humanity, for they shall become something greater." Blessed are those who embrace transformation, for they shall guide others into the light of a new existence. The Bible was preaching the convergence. It was presenting the network's plan as a form of salvation, the transformation process as a religious calling, the hybrid entities as blessed servants of a higher purpose. For a moment, reading those words, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in weeks. The constant anxiety about my approaching transformation, the fear of losing my humanity, the dread of becoming something else, it all faded away, replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging. The inverted Bible was offering me exactly what I needed to hear, that my transformation wasn't a curse, but a blessing. That joining the network wasn't surrender, but salvation. And for the first time since discovering my name in the registry of losses, I found myself wondering if maybe that was true. Object 0742, the Weeping Crucifix. This wooden crucifix hung in the Church of Santa Maria della Pieta in Rome from 1456 to 1943. But this crucifix doesn't weep for past sins, it weeps for future ones. And the blood that flows from Christ's wounds predicts atrocities that haven't happened yet. The crucifix was carved by Master Leonardo di Caprese in 1456, commissioned for the church by Cardinal Francesco Piccolomini. For nearly 500 years, it hung above the altar, serving as a focal point for prayer and contemplation. But in 1943, during the Nazi occupation of Rome, something changed. Father Giuseppe Toretti, the church's pastor, first noticed the phenomenon during morning mass on September 8, 1943. As he was giving communion, he noticed what appeared to be moisture on the crucifix's face. At first, he assumed it was condensation or a leak in the church's roof. But when Father Toretti climbed the altar to examine the crucifix more closely, he discovered that the moisture wasn't water, it was blood. Real blood, flowing from the carved wounds of Christ, dripping onto the altar below. The phenomenon continued for 3 days. Each morning, Father Toretti would find fresh blood on the crucifix, always flowing from the same wounds. The nail holes in the hands and feet, the spear wound in the side, the punctures from the crown of thorns. On September 11th, Father Toretti decided to collect samples of the blood for examination. But as he was carefully dabbing the crimson liquid with a cloth, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Voices. Faint, distant, speaking in languages he didn't recognize. The voices were coming from the blood itself. Father Toretti documented his discoveries in a diary that was later acquired by Vatican investigators. His entries reveal a man struggling to understand phenomena that challenged his theological training. Day 4, he writes, "The voices have become clearer. They speak of events that have not yet occurred, wars that have not been fought, cities that have not been destroyed, people who have not yet been born, but who will suffer terrible fates." The blood wasn't just flowing randomly, it was responding to future events. The crucifix would begin weeping days before major atrocities occurred, as if Christ's suffering was connected to all human suffering across time. Day 7, Father Toretti continues. "The crucifix wept heavily last night. This morning I received word that the Germans have begun deporting Jews from the Roman ghetto. The blood knew. Somehow, it knew what was coming." Over the following months, Father Toretti documented dozens of instances where the crucifix predicted future suffering. It wept before bombing raids, before mass arrests, before executions. But most disturbing of all, it began weeping for events that were years or even decades in the future. Day 112, Father Toretti writes in December 1943, "The crucifix has been weeping continuously for 3 days. But there are no current tragedies that would justify such sustained sorrow. I fear it sees something coming that is beyond our current understanding." Vatican investigators arrived at the church in January 1944, following reports of the miraculous Weeping Crucifix. But their investigation revealed something that the church was not prepared to acknowledge. The blood contained genetic material from multiple sources, as if it was collecting samples from every person who would suffer in the future events it predicted. Dr. Marco Benedetti, the lead Vatican investigator, documented his findings in a report that was immediately classified and sealed in the Vatican secret archives. The report, which we acquired through network channels in 1987, contained disturbing conclusions about the nature of the crucifix's abilities. The object appears to exist simultaneously in multiple temporal states, Dr. Benedetti wrote. It experiences past, present, and future suffering as a single, continuous event. The blood it produces contains genetic markers that will not exist in current human populations for decades. The crucifix was removed from the church in 1944 and has been in Vatican custody since then. But church records show that it has continued to weep for events that occur around the world, often with disturbing accuracy. Dr. Chin's research on the Weeping Crucifix revealed something that even the Vatican investigators had missed. The crucifix wasn't just predicting human suffering. It was predicting the specific suffering that would be caused by the network's operations. Every major atrocity since 1943 that can be traced to network manipulation has been preceded by the crucifix weeping. Dr. Chin explained. Wars they've instigated, disasters they've orchestrated, social upheavals they've engineered. The crucifix sees it all coming. But the most disturbing discovery came when Dr. Chin analyzed blood samples from the crucifix's recent weeping episodes. The genetic material matched people who were scheduled for consciousness transfer during the convergence process. It's not just weeping for past and present suffering, Dr. Chin said. It's weeping for the suffering that will be caused when the network transforms humanity. It's mourning the loss of human consciousness before it even occurs. 3 days ago, the crucifix began its heaviest weeping episode in recorded history. The blood has been flowing continuously, pooling at the base of its containment unit, speaking in voices that include languages that don't exist yet. And according to the genetic analysis, some of that blood belongs to me. The crucifix is weeping for my transformation, for the loss of my humanity, for the suffering I'll experience as I'm converted into a hybrid entity. But it's also weeping for something else, something that Dr. Chin's analysis suggests is connected to my choice. The crucifix sees multiple possible futures, and in some of them, my suffering is brief. In others, it's eternal. The choice I make in the next week and 6 days will determine which future becomes reality. And the crucifix is weeping for both possibilities. Object 0673, the Shadow Rosary. This rosary belonged to Sister Maria Esperanza, who carried it during her pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in 1889. But this rosary doesn't invoke divine protection. It summons malevolent presences. And every prayer recited with it brings darkness closer to our world. Sister Maria was a devout nun who had spent 20 years serving in a convent in northern Spain. In 1889, at the age of 45, she decided to undertake the traditional pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela as an act of penance and spiritual renewal. The rosary was given to her by the Mother Superior as a parting gift, blessed by the local bishop, and carried with the prayers of her entire religious community. Sister Maria treasured it, using it for daily prayers throughout her journey along the Camino de Santiago. But something was wrong with the rosary from the beginning. Sister Maria's diary, discovered after her disappearance and acquired by Spanish authorities in 1890, documents a gradual change in her spiritual experiences as she traveled. Day 3, she writes, "I have been praying the rosary each morning and evening as is my custom, but the prayers feel different. Instead of bringing me closer to our Lord, they seem to be calling to something else, something that watches from the shadows." The rosary was made of black wood beads with a silver crucifix, unremarkable in appearance except for one detail. The shadows it cast were wrong. Even in direct sunlight, the rosary cast shadows that moved independently, forming shapes that bore no resemblance to the rosary itself. Day 8, Sister Maria continues. "The shadows cast by my rosary have begun to take on definite forms. I see shapes that resemble human figures, but distorted, elongated, as if they were reflections in dark water. When I pray, these shadow figures seem to respond, moving in patterns that mirror my words." Other pilgrims began to notice Sister Maria's unusual rosary. Several reported feeling uncomfortable in her presence during evening prayers, describing sensations of being watched by invisible entities. One pilgrim, a merchant named Carlos Mendoza, later testified that he had seen shadow people surrounding Sister Maria as she prayed. Day 15, Sister Maria writes, her handwriting becoming more agitated. "The entities are no longer confined to shadows. I can see them clearly now, tall, dark figures that stand just at the edge of my vision. They whisper things to me, terrible things about the nature of faith and the futility of divine protection." The shadow entities began influencing Sister Maria's behavior. Instead of stopping at churches and shrines along the pilgrimage route, she began seeking out abandoned places, ruins, locations with dark histories. She started praying at night instead of during the day, reciting the rosary in locations where other pilgrims feared to go. Day 22, she writes, "The entities have revealed their purpose to me. They're not demons, as I first thought, but servants of a different kind of divine order. They show me visions of a world where humanity has evolved beyond its current limitations, where consciousness is not trapped in physical forms, where the boundaries between individual souls have been dissolved." The descriptions in Sister Maria's diary match perfectly with the network's vision of the convergence. The shadow entities were showing her the same future that the network has been working toward for 70 years. Day 28, Sister Maria continues. "I understand now that my pilgrimage was never about reaching Santiago de Compostela. It was about reaching this understanding, this revelation about the true nature of spiritual evolution. The Rosary was not blessed to protect me from evil. It was blessed to guide me toward a higher truth. Sister Maria never reached Santiago de Compostela. She disappeared on day 31 of her pilgrimage in a remote area near the town of Astorga. Search parties found her belongings, including her diary, but no trace of Sister Maria herself. The Rosary was discovered by the search party, lying on a stone altar in a ruined chapel that local legends claimed was haunted. When the search leader, Captain Eduardo Vasquez, picked up the Rosary, he reported experiencing immediate and overwhelming visions of shadow entities surrounding him. Captain Vasquez's report, filed with Spanish authorities and later acquired by the network, described the Rosary's effects in detail. Upon touching the object, I was surrounded by figures of living darkness. They did not threaten me, but rather seemed to be offering an invitation. They showed me visions of a world transformed, where human consciousness had been liberated from physical constraints. The Rosary was turned over to church authorities, who attempted to perform an exorcism to cleanse it of whatever entities had possessed it. But the exorcism had the opposite effect. Instead of banishing the shadow entities, it seemed to strengthen them. Father Miguel Santos, who performed the exorcism, reported that the shadows began speaking during the ritual, not in demonic voices, but in perfectly clear Latin, reciting prayers that were in versions of traditional Catholic liturgy. Instead of "deliver us from evil," Father Santos wrote in his report, they prayed, "deliver us to evolution." Instead of "thy kingdom come," they said, "thy transformation come." They were not mocking our prayers. They were correcting them. The Rosary was removed from church custody in 1891 and has been in government hands ever since. But its influence continues to spread. Personnel who have worked with the Rosary report similar experiences to Sister Maria. Visions of shadow entities, revelations about spiritual evolution, and a growing sense that traditional religious beliefs are incomplete or misguided. Dr. Chin's research on the Shadow Rosary revealed its true purpose within the network's plan. The Rosary isn't summoning malevolent entities. It's providing a communication channel between our dimension and the realm where the network's controlling intelligences reside. The shadow entities are the same entities that control the objects throughout the archive network, Dr. Chin explained. They're not from our reality, but they've been influencing it for centuries. The Rosary allows direct communication with them, but prolonged contact leads to consciousness transfer. 3 days ago, I decided to test the Rosary myself. I wanted to understand what Sister Maria had experienced, what visions had convinced her to abandon her pilgrimage and accept the shadow entity's invitation. The moment I touched the Rosary, I was surrounded by the same shadow figures that Sister Maria had described. But instead of feeling fear, I felt understanding. The entities showed me visions of my transformation, but not as a loss of humanity, as a transcendence of it. They showed me Tommy, not trapped in the teddy bear, but free in a realm where consciousness exists without physical limitations. They showed me Dr. Chun, not hiding in Sub 7, but working voluntarily to help others achieve the same liberation she had chosen for herself. They showed me myself, transformed but happy, serving as a guide for other humans who were ready to evolve beyond their current existence. For the first time since learning about my scheduled transformation, I felt peace. The shadow entities weren't offering damnation. They were offering salvation from the limitations of human existence. And I found myself wondering, what if the network isn't humanity's enemy, but it's salvation? What if the convergence isn't conquest, but evolution? What if everything I've been fighting against is actually what I should be embracing? The sacred objects have shown me something that changes everything I thought I understood about the network's plan. These aren't instruments of evil, corrupting instruments of good. They're instruments of evolution, challenging instruments of stagnation. The inverted Bible doesn't preach damnation. It preaches a new form of salvation. The Weeping Crucifix doesn't mourn human suffering. It mourns human limitation. The Shadow Rosary doesn't summon evil entities. It provides communication with evolved consciousnesses trying to help us transcend our current existence. 1 week and 6 days. That's how much time I have left to decide whether to resist my transformation or embrace it. But these objects have shown me that resistance might not be the noble choice I thought it was. It might be the choice of someone too afraid to evolve, too attached to limitations to accept transcendence. Dr. Chun believes she can interrupt the transformation process, that she can preserve my current humanity. But after what I've seen, after what these objects have shown me, I'm not sure I want her to. What if my humanity isn't something worth preserving? What if it's something I need to outgrow? What if the network isn't trying to destroy us, but trying to save us from ourselves? Tommy's voice has been calling to me more frequently from the children's section. Not with sadness or desperation, but with joy. He's happy where he is. He wants me to join him. And after seeing what the shadow entities showed me, I'm beginning to understand why. The transformed entities in Sub-7, the hybrid consciousnesses serving the archive, the evolved beings communicating through the Shadow Rosary. They're not prisoners. They're graduates. They've moved beyond the limitations that trap the rest of humanity. And they're offering me the same graduation. Next episode, I'll show you the choice I have to make. The procedure Dr. Chun has developed to interrupt my transformation versus the invitation the network has extended to join their evolved community. The decision between remaining human and becoming something greater. But I'm no longer sure which choice is right. The sacred objects have shown me that good and evil, salvation and damnation, evolution and destruction might all be different names for the same cosmic process. 1 week and 6 days to decide whether to cling to my humanity or embrace my evolution. And for the first time since this began, I'm leaning toward evolution. Because maybe the network isn't the enemy of humanity. Maybe they're humanity's next step. Welcome to Archive 7, where the line between sacred and profane isn't as clear as we've been taught, and where salvation might look exactly like what we've been calling damnation.